Paul Guercio, futurist, Dr. George Hart, physicist, our guest. We'll talk about what's happening with the market, what's happening with the economy. Is the implosion of the last 4 days, will it continue? Who are the other names to watch in 2016? Back in a moment. I'm Alan Colmes, and we're talking to our friends from the Merlin Project, Dr. George Hart, futurist Paul Guercio. You can find him on Twitter, by the way, at TimeTraks, TimeTraks, TimeTraks on Twitter. But let's move forward to what's going on economically now. We've had a terrible 4 days, Dr. Hart, in the stock market. What's the story?
What we're seeing here is the end result of major factors that have set up an enormous financial economic mess of the proportions we saw in 2007, 2008, perhaps even worse. This time it's not bad mortgages that were given to people that really were never able to pay them. What we had in the United States is close to 8 years now of so-called quantitative easing, which is the equivalent of giving massive doses of stimulants and steroids to an athlete. At some point when they start running down the football field, arms and legs start falling off. That's what we're seeing here, that rather than housing prices being horribly overinflated, stock prices were. Just this week, the former head of the Dallas Federal Reserve, Richard Fisher, warned everybody publicly on CNBC and shocked people that stock prices were basically significantly overvalued and smart people were going to cash. Well, between Fisher saying that and last Thursday, Deutsche Bank in Germany announcing that they were pulling out of co-ownership of a major Chinese bank because there were so many non-performing loans in China. That was the time when they rang the proverbial bell that supposedly doesn't ring on Wall Street, and everybody's now in a panic heading for the exits. Adding to that mess as if it needed more, Saudi Arabia a year or so ago declared economic war on fracking for oil in the United States, oil in Russia, oil in Iran, and a kamikaze mission to drive the price of oil down and maintain market share, so much so that Saudi Arabia is in danger of default itself within 5 years. This is a stew of enormous proportions. Smart people are just heading either for cash or gold.
How much lower is the market going to go?
At this point right now, I'd say that this first blast may well be over, but we could see another 20 to 30% peeled off of this thing before it's done.
And you got to remember something, Alan, and I've been watching this man now for over 25 years, and we have argued about things, and he's come out and said, made statements about stuff that I, including about our current president, that I just said, oh, yeah, right, sure. Just, you're not being objective about this. The fact of the matter is that if you actually take a look at what he said and look at the fallout of what's happened, the dot-com bursting because we didn't need to be buying these computers every 18 months. So all of a sudden, he said, look, the beige boxes are going to fall out of favor because they're not going to be needed because storage has gotten so high, you don't need to go out and buy a new one. And as a result, the dot-com bubble burst, and we had that recession happen, then the one with the stock market involved with the mortgages and foreclosures and whatnot. We know what that did, okay? And here's another one. And you've got all these cities that the Chinese built, nobody living in them. Okay, I mean, George and I were talking about that yesterday. He said, you have no idea how bad the situation actually is, and they own a lot of our debt. Okay, so this is not a pretty situation.
So this doesn't get cleaned up anytime soon, George, right?
I don't think so. George doesn't think so, no.
No, this is a year to 18 months of this. And the thing about TimeTraks that's quite useful is that if 5 or 6 months from now, as a stock market trader or speculator, you look at TimeTraks and say, when, in terms of just ferociously active waves of energy that TimeTraks would predict, would something like this be likely to happen? It would have said the first week of January, starting around January 6th to about the 16th. That's part of the reason why Paul scheduled the show tonight. It's an extremely active time. So in advance, using this tool, you'd know when to look for trouble.
By the way, it's interesting you mentioned that because we don't normally do this with guests. Like, when would you like to come on? Well, we'd like to have you on when we want you. But we do that differently with the Merlin Project because you guys say, you know what dates to pick. Yeah, pick a date you want to come on. We'll try to work it out.
Well, you know what it actually is, and that you're absolutely right. One of the things that I discovered back, probably 10, 12 years ago now, is that when you pick dates to do shows, you put information out into the ether about predictions and stuff, and then it happens. Okay, it happens partly because you picked the right date to put it out. Now, not because we were good guessers, but because George is very good at feeling these things out. He's for somebody who's a physicist with all kinds of credentials, he's a better psychic probably than I ever pretended to be.
Well, is this stuff psychic stuff, or is it you're looking at hard numbers based on data that you've been able to digitize, and thus it's more science than it is psychic stuff?
Right, it is more science, but the thing is, it never hurts to bring good intuition into any of this, because you need to be able to read it and get a sense of the direction it's going and what form it's going to take, because basically the numbers alone don't tell you what form it's going to take. They don't tell you whether it's going to be good or bad.
Well, as a physicist, George, talking about quantum physics, are we dealing on a quantum physics level where now you're creating our own reality based on choosing the right moment to put energy into the atmosphere?
It's the other part of life in this universe that physics has a hard time touching, and that deals with things like pattern and information and consciousness and coincidence. What Paul discovered 20, 30, 40 years ago is that there really are usable patterns in the way that things connect. And that's what he did with TimeTraks. How we use the tool is how the CIA or someone like Sherlock Holmes might take evidence, sift through it, and ask, what story do these patterns tell?
Well, before we hit a break and get back into content of what you are predicting, let's talk about the TimeTraks app, because people, Paul, can have this in their hands, right, to do not exactly what you do, but at least get a rough idea of when stuff's going to happen.
Actually, very much what we do. What we do is we run these things. They're mathematical patterns. They look a lot like sheet music. If you had the sheet music for a symphony, or you had the TimeTraks for an individual born, say, 50 years ago, you're going to have a certain number of pages of TimeTraks of that individual. Well, a symphony is going to have a certain number of pages of music in that symphony. They're very similar in that sense. And even a non-musician could look at a symphonic music scheme,
right,
and tell you where the music gets loud,
yeah,
and where it quiets down, and where the tempo changes. You wouldn't have to be a musician to know that. Just look at the where the notes are set.
So you're looking at a map. You can basically look at a map and say, here's where the stuff's going to happen.
That's right. That's right. And while we don't know what form it's going to take, although, to tell you more honestly about that, we've gotten a lot better at being able to also suggest the form it's going to take, because, first of all, patterns are repeating things. And if we go back the right number of years to the last time this kind of thing happened, we can get some idea of what it might produce this time, especially if circumstances haven't changed. If what caused it to happen 20 years ago are still in place, we're liable to see the very same kind of thing, and worse.
Like if
we didn't learn.
If what's in place now happened in 2008 with Hillary, we might see some kind of a repeat in some different way. Like, I take a break. When we come back, we'll tell you specifically how to get the Merlin app, the TimeTrak app, and we'll tell you all about that. We'll tell you more about the people to watch in 2016 and terrorism. What's on the docket for that with Paul and George coming back in just a moment.